Mitochondria and insulin resistance. Today we're talking about creating more of one and improving the other. Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hello, I'm the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thank you so very much for raising your health IQ with us coast to coast around the world. More than 150 countries, making this one of the most consumed nutrition podcasts anywhere on the planet today. And today, my friend, we are indeed mastering our mitochondria with Cyrus Khambatta, PhD, and he is here to share foods that are scientifically proven to create new mitochondria while also lowering your blood sugar. And you may not really realize it, but the two things are intricately linked, and what you eat plays an enormous role in their relationship. So here's what's on tap with Cy Guy. We have, number one, what exactly is mitochondria for those of us who aren't familiar? And then two, how is mitochondria and diabetes connected? Your best bets for foods that can generate new mitochondria, how these foods improve then your cellular function, some advice on some foods that you may not want to include in your diet, and we're also going to hear about Cyrus's obsession, and I call it an obsession because it's the healthiest kind, with Amla green tea. We're going to talk all about that, and if you have a question for Cyrus, go ahead, post it in the comments or in the chat. We're going to get to as many as we can with the time that we have here today, and with that, let's go ahead and welcome our good friend Cyrus Khambatta, PhD, back to the show. Good to see you, friend.
Oh, so good to see you, Chuck. How you doing today?
Oh, man, you know, if I was doing any better, it would just be criminal. Today is a beautiful day. The sun is blue, or the sun is blue. The sky is blue. The sun is bright and it's warm, and it's just a good day. The sun is not blue.
But that would be an incredible day. I'll tell you that much.
That would be a heck of a day. How are things with you in Florida, man?
Oh, man, life here in Florida is good. I mean, we had 2 hurricanes roll through in the month of October, and you want to talk about your central nervous system getting fried with all the anxiety and, not knowing what was going to happen. Is it going to be a big storm? Is it going to be a small storm? Should I protect my house? Should I leave my house? Should I stay here? Should I go somewhere else? So I think I need a little bit of defrazzing from that. But nice thing is that there was no damage to our house, and there was minimal damage to the neighborhood around us. So, we're fortunate.
Well, I'm glad that you guys made it out okay with that. And let's go ahead and defrazz, as you said, and talk about what it is that we love to discuss here on the show, and that is nutrition. But number one, mitochondria that's a pretty impressive word, and one that doesn't often come up here on the show. So when we're talking about mitochondria, in lay terms, my friend, what are we talking about?
Okay, let me give a quick backstory here. When I was back in graduate school, if we go back to the year 2007, basically between 2007 and 2012, I studied at UC Berkeley to do a PhD in nutritional biochemistry, which is basically just like super nerd nutrition. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to work with one of the world's experts in glucose metabolism. His name is Dr. Mark Hellerstein, and he is literally a real life Good Will Hunting. Maybe you guys have seen that movie where, you got Matt Damon going into MIT. He's the janitor, and he can solve these ridiculous math problems that none of the professors can solve and none of the students can solve, just because he knows things internally that he can't even really explain. So Dr. Mark Hellerstein is a real life walking Good Will Hunting. And I was so fortunate to be able to work with him because I learned a tremendous amount under his supervision. And one of the focuses of working with him was to understand how glucose metabolism is intricately linked with mitochondrial metabolism, because there's a lot of robust science demonstrating the connection between the two of those and what can go wrong when mitochondria become dysfunctional. So in the process of being able to work with him for 5 years, I studied what is known as mitochondrial biogenesis. Big words. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of cells. There are hundreds to thousands of them per cell. And I'll give you a little bit of insight into why they're so important. But mitochondrial biogenesis refers to the synthesis or the genesis of new mitochondria. And it's the study of what you can do to promote the growth of new mitochondria from a lifestyle perspective. What can you eat? What can you not eat? How can you manipulate the timing of your food? Does exercise matter? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in this process, I became kind of a super nerd when it comes to really understanding the ins and outs of mitochondrial physiology. And that's kind of what led us here today. So the reason why I become so obsessed with mitochondria is because I think personally that they are the most fascinating single thing in all of biology. Mitochondria, you can think of them as, people refer to them as the quote unquote powerhouses of the cell. And, one way to think about it is that if you live in a metropolitan area, okay, so let's say you live in the city of San Francisco, there's 700,000 people in San Francisco, and there are maybe one or maybe two power plants that are located outside of the city whose responsibility is to generate electricity and then send that electricity into the city. So you have lots of people and lots of houses and lots of businesses that are fed by just a couple of large energy producers, okay? In the human body, it's the exact opposite, okay? Rather than having a whole collection of cells, whether it's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of cells that are powered by these big power plants, you have one cell, and inside of one cell, you have hundreds or thousands of microscopic, tiny little power plants. And those are the mitochondria. Their job is to produce this stuff called ATP. And ATP is the cellular form of energy, and it would be effectively the cellular form of electricity. So the ATP that mitochondria generate is required in order to power the cell itself, because there's hundreds, if not thousands, of biochemical reactions which are happening every single moment of every single day. And those biochemical reactions, they need fuel. And the fuel is manufactured by these tiny little power plants that are inside of that same exact cell. So depending on which type of cell you are in, that is going to determine how many copies of mitochondria are present. Okay, so mitochondria are basically, we refer to them as almost everywhere, in the sense that they're in every single cell that you can possibly imagine, trillions of cells inside of your body, with the exception of one cell type. And that one cell type is red blood cells. Red blood cells do not contain their own mitochondria, but every other cell in your body does. Okay, so there's trillions of cells with hundreds or thousands of copies each. So you can think about it as though there are, it would seem like an infinite number of mitochondria per person. Okay, now the number of mitochondria that are inside of any tissue or any cell is variable. Okay, you have, as an example, inside of muscle tissue, there's three types of muscle tissue. There's white muscle tissue, there's red muscle tissue, and then there's mixed muscle tissue. Okay, so you've probably eaten turkey before, or probably been at a Thanksgiving dinner where there's turkey. When you have a turkey sitting on the table, you can either go for the light meat or the dark meat, or you can find something that's a little bit of a hybrid between the two of them. Exact same thing happens in humans. Okay, you have white meat, which is white muscle tissue, literally muscle that has the appearance that's very light colored. And that type of muscle is called white muscle. And the reason it's called white muscle is because it actually has a very low mitochondrial density. Okay, that means that inside of every cell within that muscle, there's somewhere between 100 to maybe about 400 mitochondria per cell. If you go to the exact opposite and you look for the dark meat, okay, the dark meat are the darker, redder, denser muscle fibers. And those contain somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 mitochondria per cell. Okay, and then the mixed muscle is a little bit of both. It's a little bit of the white, it's a little bit of the dark, and that exists also in various muscle tissue, and that has anywhere between 500 to 800 mitochondria per cell. Okay, so these mitochondria are very important for 1,000 different reasons, but what I really want you to understand is that they're tiny, microscopic, and there's lots and lots of them all throughout the cellular architecture. In addition to being in your muscle, they're in your liver, they're in your kidney, they're in your eyes, they're in your thyroid gland, they're in your vasculature, they're in your sexual organs, they're in your skin, they're in your nails, they are everywhere, okay? So these mitochondria are very important because, again, they're trying to produce ATP, but the question really becomes, what happens when these mitochondria become dysfunctional, okay? A lot of things can happen that lead you in the wrong direction. And one of the things that evidence-based science has actually discovered is that one of the most prominent results, or one of the most prominent effects of dysfunctional mitochondria, is the progression towards prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. In other words, if you are living in a body where mitochondria, specifically inside of your muscle tissue, and also mitochondria specifically within your liver tissue, become dysfunctional over the course of time, then what you will find, what you are likely to find over the course of time, is that your blood glucose begins to rise. Your muscle and liver become have a difficult time managing or regulating their blood glucose. Your insulin requirements will begin to climb, and you are likely to move in the direction of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, causing a overall metabolic problem that becomes body-wide. So, Chuck, does that answer your question in any way, shape, or form?
Very well, my friend. And might I say that if you ever decide to make a massive career change, I think you should go right to the local high school and teach biology. I think you would just nail it, and the kids would love it. Hell, man. Now, you know what? We're talking college level for you, so you can be Professor Khambatta. That's what I'm talking about.
I would love both of those, honestly. That would be a very fun job, no question.
Dude, I think that you would dominate. Now, let's shift gears here and talk about the connection between insulin resistance and mitochondria. It seems like we were kind of headed down that path a little bit, but Eduardo kind of hit the nail on the head. A comment at 12:03. He's watching today from Mexico City, by the way. Thanks for tuning in, Eduardo.
What's up, my man?
He says, as a vegan marathoner and someone with a history of familial diabetes, I'm very interested in this subject. So let's connect the dots for Eduardo and everybody else who's watching and listening right now.
Okay, cool. So the question really becomes, what's the connection between mitochondrial physiology as well as insulin resistance, correct?
Oui, monsieur.
Okay, cool. All right. So this is a very good question. Now, if we go backwards and look at the sort of beginnings of insulin resistance, what you will find is that even though the general public wants you to believe that diabetes, type 2 diabetes and prediabetes is caused by a diet that contains a significant amount of sugar and carbs, the truth is that if you look in the evidence-based research where the actual science lives, what you'll find is that both in animal studies as well as in human studies, there's a simpler, quicker, and more effective, more repeatable way to create insulin resistance. And that is via a diet that contains a significant amount of dietary fat, not dietary sugar, okay? Sugar can certainly increase your risk for prediabetes and type 2 diabetes without a shadow of a doubt. Sugar, when I refer to sugar, I'm talking about literally sucrose that comes from table sugar, which is one glucose molecule and one fructose molecule bonded together, okay? Whether you're talking about sucrose that comes from artificial sweeteners, or whether you're talking about high fructose corn syrup, or any of the artificial sweeteners that you find in a lot of common packaged foods, these components of the diet can certainly increase your risk for prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and they directly impact the health of your liver. Okay, the more of those you put into your diet, the more likely your liver is to become dysfunctional. And as a result of that, your liver has a very difficult time, number one, importing glucose from the blood. And number two, your liver becomes very active at exporting glucose into your blood, which means that for long durations of time, your liver is basically just putting a lot of glucose inside of your blood, which causes your blood glucose to rise despite the fact that you haven't eaten anything. Okay, so if we put sugar aside and we put carbohydrate aside and say, well, what happens to people when they consume a decent amount of fat in their diet? When I say decent amount, I mean about 15% of your total calories or more on a daily basis. What we have found over the course of time and working with tens of thousands of people, and then also substantiated by a lot of evidence-based research, you find that people who consume a significant amount of fat actually develop insulin resistance in both their liver and their muscle tissue. And the reason why this happens is because even Dr. Barnard talks about this very openly. There's two problems that occur. Number one, it's called intramyocellular lipid accumulation. Again, big words. Intramyocellular refers to inside the muscle tissue, okay? Intramyocellular, inside the muscle tissue, okay? Lipid accumulation means the accumulation of fatty material inside the muscle tissue, okay? That's problem number one. And then you have another thing called intrahepatic triglyceride. Intrahepatic means inside your liver tissue. Triglyceride means fatty acids again, okay? So when you consume a significant amount of fat, what ends up happening is that both your liver and your muscle tissue become reliant on fatty acids for energy. They basically turn down glucose metabolism, and they increase their reliance upon fatty acids. which you think would be not a big deal, because if you could just sort of switch from one fuel over here to another fuel over here, that's not a big deal. But the problem is that as soon as you switch over from the glucose economy over into the fatty acid economy, you get a whole bunch of side effects that come along for the ride. And one of those side effects is that those cells inside of your liver and the cells inside of your muscle end up accumulating a significant amount of triglyceride, which is fatty acids that are stored for long periods of time. And they sit inside of those cells. And when those triglycerides begin to accumulate over the course of time, they block insulin action. Okay, let me be very clear about this. Cells that operate in the fatty acid economy, meaning cells that are exposed to large quantities of fatty acids in the blood, cells that uptake a lot of fatty acids from the blood for energy, cells that store fatty acids for energy, cells that utilize fatty acids for energy, end up in an ecosystem whereby the presence of those fatty acids blocks insulin signaling. And that is the problem. That is the main problem, because when you inhibit or block insulin signaling in the liver and in the muscle, you run into big, big, big problems. When insulin tries to knock on the door, goes, knock, knock, there's glucose inside of the blood. Would you like to take it up? If you're living in an insulin resistant world where both the liver and muscle do not want to pay attention to insulin, then both of those tissues are like, I can't hear you. I'm not going to respond to you. I'm just going to keep my doors closed. You can do whatever you want. So insulin goes, knock, knock. I got glucose in the blood. Do you want to take it up? And both those tissues are like, sorry, I'm closed for business. I'm not going to do this. Okay. That's a huge problem, because that means that insulin is not effective. Insulin does not relay the signal to the cell that they can open up the doors and allow glucose to come in. And as a result of that, well, guess what? If insulin can't do its job, then glucose ends up accumulating in your blood. That's where it becomes a problem, because you eat some food, then you check your blood glucose a little bit later. You go, I just ate one banana and now my glucose is 147. I just ate one banana and now my glucose is 192. I don't understand what's going on. I guess bananas are bad for me. But in reality, it's not the banana's fault. Okay, it's the problem is that you consumed a significant amount of fat leading up to that banana. And as a result of that, there's a insulin communication problem. And the insulin communication problem then leads to high blood glucose. Okay, that is classic insulin resistance. Chuck, I'm going to stop talking here. Did I confuse you or anybody else in this room?
No, I'm picking up what you're putting down. We've talked a lot about intramyocellular lipid previously, so I kind of understand the functionality of that there. I think that that's really good, Professor. I want to ask a question for Aubrey, who's watching us on YouTube right now. She's wondering, well, what about the sweeteners that aren't exactly, table sugar like you're talking about? She says that she uses something called Pure, which is Pyure, and Sweet and Low, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. Do they have the same effect that you're talking about here?
Okay, good question. So I do not know the product Pure, Pyure. I have to go do a little bit of research on that. Sweet and Low definitely is a refined product. I would not add that to your diet. There's a whole collection of different sweeteners. You have everything from aspartame, which is actually a dipeptide. It's not a sweetener, but it's just two amino acids that are very sweet in flavor. Then you have the high fructose corn syrups, the mannitols, the sorbitols, the sugar alcohols, and many different derivations of these artificial sweeteners. Then in addition to that, you have these things called natural sweeteners. And the natural sweeteners are things like stevia, okay, which is literally a plant. It's a leaf. You take stevia, you grind it, and then you end up with this white powder. And this white powder does not stimulate an insulinogenic response, which is a good thing. And it's extremely sweet. So just a tiny little bit of that can actually go a very long way in putting in your food. Now, if you were to use any of these natural sweeteners, stevia is one example. Then there's a monk fruit extract, which is also another example. Those would be the quote unquote safe ones, in my opinion. Those are considered the diabetes friendly sweeteners. But if you take a step backwards and ask yourself a question, why do you even need to add sweeteners to your food in the first place? Okay, that's the question I like to ask people. I say, well, why are you putting sweeteners inside of your oatmeal? Or why are you putting sweeteners inside of your smoothie? What's the point? And people go, well, it's too bland without it. I just need the sweet flavor. And I say, well, What if I were to put you into a new world where you eat a diet that's 100% whole food plant-based, and you give your taste buds an opportunity to just relax? Because right now your taste buds are basically being inundated with hyper palatable, very concentrated sweeteners, as well as likely hyper concentrated oils. And as a result of that, every time these like very refined and processed ingredients hit your tongue, it stimulates a neurological impulse that goes right into your brain that says dopamine, 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 dopamine. And that's why you like it, because it hits your tongue and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that tastes good. I want more. I want more. I want more. And before you know it, you become sort of like a mildly addicted to these foods. What we have found over the course of time, and I think Chuck is also, very well versed in this as well, which is when you effectively stop putting those sweeteners and those refined concentrated ingredients into your food, you allow your tongue to just relax and not be inundated with these hyperpalatable flavors. And as a result of that, the dopamine release in your brain calms down just a little bit. And it might feel a little uncomfortable at first, for the first week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or so, because you're not getting that dopamine release that you normally would get with every single bite of food. But what ends up happening over the course of that 2 to 3 weeks or so is that your tongue wakes up, and your tongue all of a sudden says, you know what? I don't need those hyperpalatable flavors anymore. I'm going to instead I'm going to be able to taste the sweetness that comes from a mango versus the sweetness that comes from a banana, because it's different. And then you start to become really refined in your flavor palette. And as a result of that, things that weren't that appetizing to you back in the day now all of a sudden become really tasty. As an example, I had some spaghetti squash last night, and I ate, a couple of forkfuls of it, and I was just like, wow, this is unbelievable, right? But if you would ask me to eat spaghetti squash when I was 20 years old, I would have taken the bowl and just shoved it right back at you. You'd been like, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. I'm not going to have this stuff, right? So my suggestion to you would be to try and relax your need for these refined sweeteners. And as a result of that, you'll actually be able to establish a new physiology on your tongue, which is then going to communicate with your brain in a different way.
Oh man, tell me about it. And the funny thing is, it's also true that if you eliminate that stuff from your system for a period of time, and then you go back and you reintroduce a hyperpalatable food, it's probably not going to taste as great as you remember it. It's just going to be overwhelming, too oily, too salty, too sweet, just too everything. And you're like, how did I ever like this? But then the damnedest thing is, you're still going to crave it again in just a little bit, even though you didn't like it. That's your brain.
That's so true.
That's so the food addict, man. Couple really quick, if you could just touch on these, because we have some roomies, like you talk about sweets and it's just like, boom, the chat explodes. Deborah is wondering if the same thing would apply for something like dates. She says that she uses date paste instead of refined sugar or maple syrup. Date paste, does that get the thumbs up or thumbs down from you?
Yeah, so I would give date paste a more of a thumbs up. I would personally say eat the date. Don't need to even turn it into a paste. Just eat the date. I eat dates all day long every day, and it's a fantastic addition to your diet.
The medjool dates, man. Once they hit your lips, so good.
Isn't it? It's like candy, man. It's unbelievable.
Dude, that's exactly what it is. And then Richie is wondering about honey, which technically is not vegan, but nonetheless, a lot of people use it. So honey, where does that fall with you?
Totally. Yeah. So honey is one of those foods that can become very controversial. Is it vegan? Is it plant-based? Is it not vegan? Is it not plant-based? Here's the thing. Don't put it in a box. If you want to use a little bit of honey on your food, according to Cyrus Khambatta, totally cool. Go ahead and use a little bit on your food. You also see on forks or knives, as an example, they use maple syrup in very small quantities to add just a touch of sweetness to various dishes. If you want to do either one of those, in my book, that's totally fine. But again, I want you to do it not because you are reliant on it. I want you to do it because you are intentionally adding a small amount of sweetness to your food to get a specific texture or a specific, flavor profile. I don't want you to do it because your brain is addicted to sweet flavors. They're two fundamentally different settings, and I want you to be very clear about which one is affecting you.
Extropian transhuman, a regular exam roomie with a fun name. They're talking about a type of date that I am not familiar with, a Kadrawi date?
Kadrawi. Yeah.
You've had one of those? Is it legit?
There's thousands of date varieties. There's like the honey, the Kadrawi, the Barhi, the medjool, the deglet, you name it. Kadrawis are very, very tasty, very sweet as well.
Are they right up there with the medjool, or are they more of a deglet? Those are the ones that I think people are most familiar with.
Yeah. It's a person by person preference. I like the Kadrawi. I just can't eat nearly as many of them as I can with the Medjool. I think the Medjool personally is the king of all dates.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to get a better one.
All right. Let's put a cap on fat here. We celebrate eating plants at 1226. Do the high omega-3 seeds like flax and chia create insulin resistance at higher amounts, or only are we talking about those bad and inflammatory fats?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So it's a little bit of a gray area because you're sort of like, what's a higher amount? What's a smaller amount? Our recommendation is very simple. We strongly recommend adding either freshly ground chia seeds or freshly ground flax seeds into your diet on a daily basis so that you can get those readily available, bioavailable omega-3s that are very important for nervous system function and they have very powerful anti-inflammatory effects. Our suggestion is to eat 1 to 2 tablespoons of freshly ground chia or 1 to 2 tablespoons of freshly ground flax per day. That's it. You don't need any more. That gets you the omega-3 essential requirement that helps you meet your omega-3 essential requirements every day. You do not need any more. But if you were to, OD on them, it could certainly cause your blood glucose to, do funny things. And again, the main reason for that is because fatty acids and glucose do not like each other, and they're never going to like each other. So if you really want your glucose to stay low first thing in the morning and then also all throughout the day, I strongly recommend trying to keep your total fat intake to somewhere about 15% of total calories. And when you do it that way, it's a complete game changer.
All right. As the title of the program today suggests, best foods for new mitochondria. So you did a video that was very popular a number of months ago, got hundreds of thousands of views, where you listed 4 of your favorites. Can you give us some more that we might want to really include in our diet if we're looking to boost the old mitochondria, my friend?
Absolutely. Can I share my screen? Maybe is that possible?
Yeah. So at the bottom, you know StreamYard, don't you? You go down to present. Bear with us. We're live here. But I'll tell you, people love talking about some dates. That's still going in the chat, by the way. Post your favorite dates, my friend. Post your favorite dates in the chat. All right, we got your screen up here.
Maybe we should just do an entire episode on nothing but dates.
You're welcome back anytime, and we'll do a taste test. It'll be phenomenal.
Oh, wow. Now you're talking. Okay.
Yeah, buddy.
So you see the screen right here. Okay.
We got it.
It says seek plant-based foods with high phenolic content at every meal. Okay. So we began this conversation by talking about mitochondria. Why? Because mitochondria are important. They're the primary location of ATP generation. You would be dead if you didn't have hundreds of trillions of functioning mitochondria. And it is a very smart nutritional strategy and a very smart lifestyle strategy to try and preserve mitochondrial function as much as possible so that you can minimize your risk for not only prediabetes and type 2, but for many different chronic diseases, including many versions of heart disease. All right. So the question then becomes, well, what can you put in your mouth that will actually make your mitochondria happy? All right. So there's lots of research in this world. And this one particular image on the screen shows you a very simple way of thinking about what foods actually not only help mitochondria do good things and continue to stay alive, but actually increase the number of mitochondria over the course of time. Okay, that's the kicker. I'm not talking necessarily about just keeping your existing mitochondria happy. That's important, don't get me wrong. But in addition to that, the foods that you see on the screen here are actually shown to make new mitochondria. And that is a game changer in the world of mitochondrial physiology. Okay. So if you go from the left to right, we'll see we have everything from soybeans that contain a particular compound known as genistein. Okay. Soybeans are foods that you can eat, which will actually make new mitochondria. And I'll show you a little bit more about that too. Cacao beans. Who knew you can literally eat chocolate and you will make new mitochondria? Okay. Store that in your back pocket. Trust me. That's like one of the greatest things you may have ever heard.
Dude, you just made a lot of people's day, man.
No, I don't know why viewership went up so much. Okay. Then in addition to that, we also have things like onions and apples, blueberries, red grapes, cinnamon, coffee seeds, and then red grapes again. All right. Now, underneath each one of those foods, you'll see that it has some cryptic word like genistein or epicatechin or quercetin or anthocyanins, okay? Those are all different polyphenolic compounds, okay? Polyphenols are a type of antioxidant compound. And the research has demonstrated that the foods that have high phenolic content or high polyphenolic content are the foods that are typically found to have the most direct crosstalk with mitochondria. In other words, if you can consume foods, intentionally consume foods that have a very high phenolic content on a daily basis, you are going to be making your mitochondria very happy, and those mitochondria are going to replicate and make little new baby mitochondria, and baby mitochondria are going to be even happier. Okay? So let me just kind of show you some super nerd science here, right here. Let's deep dive into this soybean right here, okay? Let's take a look at this one particular experiment, okay? This happened in humans where they're trying to determine the effects of genistein supplementation, okay? So they didn't feed the actual soybean. They took the active compound known as genistein, and they fed this to patients. They took one group, which is a placebo group, obese, insulin-resistant individuals, and they received an inert substance. Basically, they received nothing. And then they took another group, which was the treatment group, and they were also obese and insulin-resistant, and they received a daily supplement containing 50 milligrams of this antioxidant that comes from soy called genistein for 60 days. Well, what happened? Take a look at this, okay? Genistein supplementation was found to increase mitochondrial number in the muscle of human beings. This is a massive finding, massive finding. It's very hard to do this, okay? It says in humans, genistein also increased AMPK phosphorylation and mitochondrial abundance in the muscle of obese subjects, okay? Don't worry about this. This is a complicated biological term, but all you need to know is that it increased mitochondrial abundance, which means that new mitochondria were found, all right? This is where it gets really interesting, okay? 2 months of genistein supplementation significantly improved insulin sensitivity. So how do we know that? All right. Take a look at these two graphs right here on the top in A and B. Okay. On the left-hand side, we have glucose versus time, and then we have insulin versus time. And what you'll find, let me maybe zoom in on this if I could do that, is that, okay, when you take a look at the glucose concentrations on an oral glucose tolerance test, okay, before and after the experiment, what you'll find is that before the experiment, when people were fed glucose, 75 grams of glucose, and then their glucose values were monitored over the course of time, you ended up with this gray graph. Okay, their blood glucose started about 100, it went up to about 170, and then it came right back down. Okay, obese, insulin-resistant subjects, this is what you would expect. At the end of the experiment, they repeated this oral glucose tolerance test, and guess what? Their glucose didn't really change that much. It might look a little bit different to you, but it's actually not. From a scientific perspective, it's pretty much the same. Okay, so their glucose, the amount of glucose in their blood wasn't changing. Okay, and the amount of insulin that's present inside of their blood actually didn't change. And this, again, this is the placebo group. So nothing happened to these people. Same glucose, same insulin. Now, if we take a look at what happened to the people eating genistein on a daily basis, take a look at this. Before, in green, this was their glucose concentrations, pretty much the exact same curve that you saw from above. Okay, went up to about 170, starting at about 100, and then it came right back down to about 140. Okay, afterwards, not that much of a difference. Okay, blue is pretty much still the exact same. So these two curves are pretty much the exact same. So, all right, nothing happened to their glucose. Great. Why is this interesting? Here's why. Take a look at this. In green, we have, this is what happened to their insulin concentrations during that same test. At the beginning of the study, you see that their insulin concentrations started at about, 10 or so micromole per milliliter and went all the way up to about 160 and then came a little bit back down. And then if you take a look at it afterwards, you see this blue graph. You might be like, come on, Cyrus, these two aren't different. Actually, if you take a look at the statistical significance of the two of these are very different graphs. Okay, so this right here demonstrates that people who use this genistein supplement for 60 days ended up with less insulin production. They were more effective, they were more efficient in their insulin production. And the reason why that's important is because the conclusion of the paper definitely shows this. It says the increase in mitochondrial respiratory capacity, which was measured in a different graph, leads to an improvement in glucose tolerance and a decrease in serum insulin concentrations as observed in humans with the metabolic syndrome. Effectively, here's what they're saying is that the reason these people got healthier is because, number one, they made more mitochondria, and simultaneously, number two, the usage of those new mitochondria, the presence of those new mitochondria actually help them secrete less insulin and become more responsive to glucose. And all of those things are very good. Okay, so that's number one. We care about soybeans. We care about genistein. That's a good thing. Number two, dark chocolate. This is mind-boggling. Dark chocolate, which is rich in a compound known as epicatechin, for 3 months increases VO2 max. Basically, this increases your performance while exercising. And this is all measured via an increase in mitochondrial number and mitochondrial function. This is fascinating. Literally what this is saying is that you can consume cocoa. And if you do this on a daily basis, hopefully not milk chocolate, but you're actually taking the cacao beans themselves, or these cacao nibs that you can see on the screen. These bad boys will actually preserve mitochondrial function, increase mitochondrial function, and make new mitochondria, which will make you actually perform exercise, could make you perform exercise to a higher degree.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, there's a big difference between what's on the screen and like a Hershey special dark bar that you might find in a candy store or the grocery store, man. Huge difference there.
No doubt, no question. I'm glad you brought that up. There's no question. Now, in addition to that, red grapes contain this compound called resveratrol, okay? You're going to have to eat a barrel full of red grapes every day to get enough resveratrol to elicit this effect. So my recommendation is, rather than eating the red grapes in this particular example, if you can find yourself a resveratrol supplement, okay, a highly concentrated resveratrol supplement, this has been known for many years to significantly improve insulin resistance, help lower blood glucose, and it all functions by improving mitochondrial function, specifically in muscle tissue. There are thousands of papers that talk about resveratrol. When I first learned about resveratrol, I honestly thought that it was one of the coolest compounds that I'd ever seen before. I was shocked at how powerful it was. Now, the last thing I'll talk about right here are known as nitrate-rich vegetables. You might have heard of nitrate-rich vegetables before, okay? These are the types of vegetables that they grow in the ground, right? They're either things like beets, or they're spinach and celery and Swiss chard and kale and arugula and certain types of lettuces, okay? So we're talking dark leafy greens and beets. These compounds have been known. Dr. Greger talks about it. I believe Dr. Barnard talks about it. These nitrate-rich vegetables are really powerful at lowering blood pressure. And they're really powerful at promoting oxygen delivery to tissues. That's great. Go for it. Like I'm all about that. This is a very important food group to have in your mouth on a daily basis. But there's a body of research that actually demonstrates that these nitrate-rich vegetables don't stop there. They can improve blood flow. They can make more oxygen get to tissues, but they actually improve mitochondrial physiology at the same time. This is mind-boggling because I did not know this until delving into the research myself. But when I first learned it, I was like, wow, this is a big deal. Okay. It says here, we show that nitrate, a simple inorganic anion, basically nitrate-rich vegetables, okay, has profound effects on basal human mitochondrial function as well as whole body oxygen consumption during exercise. In other words, when you consume nitrate-rich vegetables on a daily basis, you can actually exercise for less oxygen, meaning it is easier to exercise. And I can tell you from personal experience that this is a very true statement. If you're consuming beets on a daily basis, or you have a lot of spinach and arugula in your diet, exercise becomes easier and you can feel it. And as a result of that, you can exercise a little bit more and push a little bit harder, which is going to get you more of a metabolic boost. It's going to lower your blood glucose and improve your cardiovascular physiology simultaneously.
There you go.
Okay. So
yeah, man, I know that for a fact as well. And I know that we have a free ebook specifically for plant-based athletes. It's a plant-based nutrition guide for athletes. And you can get your copy right now. Head over to pcrm.org/athlete. And automatically, here's the bonus. You're going to become an Exam Room VIP. So that's our insiders club for Exam Room, is get our monthly newsletter with tips and tricks and insights and announcements and all that good stuff. But really, the free ebook for athletes, that easy for me to say, plant-based nutrition guide, is right there for you. Just click the link down below in the show description. That's amazing stuff, man. Like, number one, I got to go back to You got to be a professor at some point before you retire. You'd just be so good at that.
I appreciate that, man. Maybe I should take that up in my next career.
I mean, maybe. But number two, I mean, you're right. And from experience, I mean, just the way that I was able to exercise pre becoming plant-based and post is night and day. It's absolutely night and day. Does that mean
What did
that
you
if
feel?
you eat a crap ton of spinach, you're automatically going to be in the NBA or the NFL? No. But when you go out for a run, you're definitely going to notice a difference, and you'll run circles around your neighbors. And that's what counts in the neighborhood, my friend.
Amen to that. You get your bragging rights for sure. What did you feel? Did you feel that exercise was a little bit easier, that running just required a little bit less effort? What?
Yeah, I didn't get winded.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It was like the endurance really went up, and certainly less painful, quicker recovery time. I used to be big on running stairs in between shifts at the radio station. I would just like come back and I'd be like soaked in sweat, and I didn't care. It was radio. I wasn't on camera, so the only people who were suffering were the people in the newsroom with me when I would stink it up because, well, I was a sweaty mess. But I didn't care. But I went from being able to do like maybe 20, 30 flights to being able to do like 50, 60, no problem. And it was like just night and day, night and
Yeah, all of
day.
a sudden
And
you're like, what has gotten into me? Where'd I get this turbo boost from? It's crazy.
for real, man, for real.
Yeah.
But let me ask you before we wrap up here, man. I know another big thing that you get a big turbo boost from is something we've talked about in the past too, called Amla.
Yeah.
And I know that you have this obsession. I said it at the top, the obsession with Amla green tea. What kind of boost are you getting there, man?
Okay. Let me give you a quick background here. Amla, A-M-L-A. It's another funny word. Amla stands, or basically is a word that comes from India to describe the Indian gooseberry. It's a synonymous term. The Indian gooseberry has been used in Ayurvedic medicine for like 2,000 years. They use it as a cure-all for everything. I mean, whether you have type 2 diabetes, or whether you have digestive issues, or whether you got bitten by a snake, they're like, oh, you have a problem? Take some Amla. Oh, you got a skin discoloration? Take some Amla. Oh, you didn't sleep well last night? Take some Amla. So when I first heard about this, I was like, come on, that's a joke. You can't, there's no one food that's going to be like the cure-all, right? But then as I read a lot of the scientific research that is being conducted in today's world to try and understand if any of that is actually true, the scientific research is very powerful. And what the scientific research demonstrates is that there are effectively 4 benefits that come along with the Indian gooseberry that most people don't know anything about. Number 1, Amla berries are the most powerful anti-inflammatory food in the world. Okay, you read about these foods that are, that are exciting, and you're like, oh, cool, sweet. I want some acai berries because I heard they have a lot of anti-inflammatory power, or I want to eat some blueberries, or maybe you'll have some cranberries every so often, right? And people get excited about this because you're like, great, sweet. I want more anti-inflammatories in my diet. Well, it turns out that the Amla berry has more antioxidant power than practically any food ever discovered. So take a look at my screen here. Okay, what you will see, can you see this graph on the screen here, Chuck?
Let's go ahead and add that to there we go. Hello.
There we go. Okay, so here, take a look at this. We got goji berries at the very bottom, right? They have a number of 3290. Basically, the numbers that you see on the screen here correspond to a measurement that's done in a laboratory called the ORAC scale. Okay, the ORAC is basically stands for oxygen radical absorbance capacity. Don't worry about the complex details of this. This is a way of measuring antioxidant power of a food. So you take the same amount, the same weight of food, and you can put it through this test, and it'll spit back at you and say how much antioxidant power any one of these foods has. Goji berries, everybody's like, oh, cool, I want gojis in my food. They got an ORAC value of 3,000. Pomegranate, 4,000. Blueberries, 9,000. Okay, look at cacao powder. Part of the reason why cacao is such a powerful food is because its ORAC value is very high at 55,000. Acai is in the 100,000. Turmeric, which is like the mother of all antioxidants, 127,000. Who doesn't want that? Take a look at Amla berries. They're double turmeric. That's a big deal. More than double turmeric. 261,500 on the ORAC scale. Okay, that's bonkers high. Okay, in fact, it is so high that Indian gooseberries are known as the single most powerful antioxidant in the world. And in addition to that, they also have other benefits that come along for the ride. Number 1, they're the most powerful cholesterol reducing food in the world. So if if you can chat with us here on the show, tell us if you have high cholesterol, if you're using a statin medication, or if you have been dealing with high cholesterol for some period of time, because These Indian gooseberries can be a very powerful addition that many of our customers find that their that their cholesterol comes down very quickly within the first 3 months. Okay. In addition to that, Amla berries are a very powerful blood pressure reducing food and a very powerful blood glucose reducing food. Okay. So all of these are very good things. And it turns out, if we go back to the original conversation that we had about, what foods are good for mitochondrial physiology, it's the foods that have a high polyphenol content. Amla berries, their polyphenol content is extremely high because polyphenols are antioxidants, and antioxidants are extremely high in amla berries. So there has been zero research to determine whether or not the polyphenol content of the amla berry can improve mitochondrial function. And I'm not a betting man, but if I were willing to put some money down, I would put some serious money down on these guys that I think all my powers of analysis tell me that these guys can probably significantly improve mitochondrial function. There's just no study to actually prove that yet.
Maybe in the future. If you're watching and you feel like doing some research, you got some funding, hey, have at it. We'd love to see it. Sherry, by the way, in the chat says that she lowered her cholesterol after adding Amla every single day to her diet.
Look at that. Amazing. That's great.
Joanne's putting it in her smoothie. Karen is also getting it into her diet. So a lot of people are using it already, man. And I know you're a big fan, and I saw Amla Green up there. That was the name of there. So is that mixed with the green tea for a little antioxidant super boost?
Yeah, let me put this right here. So
there it is.
What you see, the amla berry is very hard to eat. It's extremely sour. And that's part of the reason why it's so powerful, because these really sour flavors can actually have very potent biological effects. So what I did was I took a long time to try and find a way to make them not taste junky. And in order to do that, we had to take them and mix them with various other, ingredients in the plant-based world. And the first flavor that we made was basically amla berries mixed with green tea. And that right there is this first version right here. So this is literally a powder that you can mix with water, and you can drink it as a tea. You can put it into a smoothie. You can put it into soup. You can put it anywhere. In addition to that, we also made a whole bunch of different flavors. We have an elderberry flavor. We have a hibiscus flavor. We also have a pumpkin spice flavor if you're into that. So there's a whole
got into the pumpkin spice craze? That's
amazing.
That's amazing.
It's actually really, really tasty. So long story short, I'm not here to put on a sales pitch for anybody. If you are looking to reduce inflammation, if you are looking to either lower your glucose or your cholesterol or your blood pressure, I strongly recommend looking into the world of amla berries. And if you're interested in amla green, by all means, we have products that have been shown to be very effective. We got thousands of people on our website that have given reviews, and I'd love to be able to help you out if possible.
Yeah, and there's a link for you guys to check that out right now with the article that you wrote that has a ton of science backing up everything that you just said, that you put up on the Amla Green website. That's in the show description and in the episode notes. I believe the website as well is just amlagreen.com. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. amlagreen.com. That's the name of the website. Yep.
All right, but really, really easy. Just click that link down below. We'll make it super, super easy for you, man. Brother, listen, we're fresh out of time, but I would love to have you back anytime. I'm just love it when class is in session, dude. Professor Khambatta coming through with some big time nutrition nuggets today. I appreciate you, friend.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate being invited to the show. I'm here for you anytime. And, my goal is to try and educate people as much as possible. You have more power on your plate and you have more power in your fridge than you might think. All right. The research shows time and time again that if you make intelligent choices about eating foods that have a high polyphenol content, that have a high nitrate content, that have a high fiber content, that have a high water content, what you'll find is that the more of those foods you put into your body, the more problems they solve. So at all points, do whatever you can to try and migrate towards as plant strong of a diet as you possibly can. And one day we'll all be able to look and talk and feel like Chuck. This guy's got more energy than any human being I've ever met before. And I appreciate you big time.
I appreciate you too, brother, man. Let's link up sometime soon. I hear Miami's nice in March. Can't say much more than that, but I hear it's a wonderful place.
It's an incredible spot.
So
you're always welcome.
All right, my friend. Well, look, I appreciate you. We will talk again soon.
Sounds good.
All right, and thank you to the crew behind the scenes for making the magic happen, and to you exam roomies for all of your wonderful questions today. You guys knocked it out of the park once again on a global scale. And on behalf of everybody here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. We will talk to you very soon, but until then, keep it plant-based.